Hi, Dr. P here to talk about a subject that's big enough to make this a two-parter. Ways to represent technology and research in war games. This is an intermediate issue because war is about maneuver or placement in games and geospatial relationships. Further, changes in technology don't come into battle games because of their limited time scale, but they can influence war games. So technology and the research that leads to new tech are a secondary or intermediate issue. It's most often seen in civilization building games and in Space Empire or 4X games. But we can think of many examples from World War II, if not elsewhere, where technology has strongly influenced warfare. Think of chariots, or cavalry, or armored cavalry, cataphracts. Development of each of those made a big difference. Think of steppe nomad horse archers, which were adopted to an extent by the Byzantines, but were primarily a nomad capability. Think of crossbows and English longbows. The difference being that English longbows could fire much faster. Think of World War I tanks, World War II radar, Japanese long lance torpedoes, German schnorkels, which enabled a submarine to stay submerged while running their diesels and recharging their batteries, but it came too late to make a big difference. Proximity fuses, which helped the Americans fight off the kamikazes. Or perhaps most of all in the modern world, think of nuclear weapons. Technology does make a difference. In some situations, often it does not. What's the typical representation of technology in a game? Well, in board games, and I think derivatively from that in computer games, it's a tech tree, a path or paths, somewhat resembling a tree, that flow from one invention to another, or to two others, or even three others. So you follow along the tech tree, and you can't get to one invention until you've done the inventions that precede it, inventions or technologies. I first saw this in Civilization II, the computer game, although I think it really originates from Civilization, the board game, which preceded Civilization, the computer game. I most felt it in Masters of Orion II, where research is very important, and technology can make a huge difference in battles. The board game version of the Civilization computer games that came after the computer games includes tech trees, and I'm sure there are other board games that do it as well. So it's a step-by-step process. One choice or development in a tree leads to others. Sometimes there's branches. The method strikes me as somewhat cumbersome and appropriate perhaps more for computer games and long board games than for shorter games. You need to have a tree graphic. You need to be able to mark or keep track in some way which inventions have already been achieved and where you are on the tech tree. There are lots of steps to go through, so it doesn't seem to be appropriate for shorter games. Now in computer games, it's easy to implement the changes in rules that usually derive from development of technology. In board games, you need to have some restraint if you want the game to be of less than epic length. And also you have to keep in mind rules changes offer more chances for player confusion, regardless of whether it's a video game or a computer game or a tabletop game. The difference, of course, always in video games that are single player is if you do get confused, you can go back to your save game and go again. And that's not true when you have human opposition. Now, a simpler version of a tech tree, which isn't really a tech, might only be a list of prerequisites for particular inventions. But this would need to be a limited list, or you're going to end up with something like a tech tree to enable the players to see where they are and what's going on. Now, in most versions of tech trees, a player spends economic resources on research, and then either when he reaches a particular threshold, he gets the tech, or he rolls a die, and when he gets the right roll, he gets the tech. If he spends enough, then he doesn't need to roll a die. Sometimes uh, you have a track and you can see your progress as you spend money, and you can roll while you're going along the track, but if you get to the end, then you've got it no matter what. Now, there's a lot of chance in real technology research, but game players often don't want to have chance in their game. They want to have control over what happens. Now let's take the specific example of Axis and Allies, since that's a very well-known game. It has a very simple tech method, although there are lots of variations with the various versions of Axis and Allies, and the URL here on the screen is where you can find all those versions and how the tech works listed. In general, there's a die roll involved. There's no trees, just individual techs. In the original Nova Games edition, you pay 5 points for a dice roll, and on a 6, you get a randomly determined tech. And of course, if you spend 15 points, you get 3 dice rolls. So that is in keeping with the dice fest nature of the game as a whole. There's lots of chance in research, but that probably reflects a considerable part of the reality better than many methods do. Now, I've looked for simpler methods for shorter games. I have a prototype space war game where I have 4 categories of technology: combat, economic, space travel, and defense. Players can spend resources to buy or research a technology. When they've gone through 3 phases of research in one of the categories, then they get a technology, and there's actually 2 choices. The progression is represented by tiles simply labeled 1, 2, and 3, although the 3 also includes which of the 2 possibilities. Each of the tiles represents a victory point at the end of the game. So between 1/4 and 1/3 of the victory points come from technologies. The effect on the game of the technologies is not super strong, but because you get points, people are likely to spend some amount of economic value researching technology. Now, I'm going to stop there, and in part 2 I'll talk about even simpler methods and how the actual technology is represented in the game and other topics.